Raghuram Rajan returns, and he's speaking to us at CNBC TV 18 after the publication of his collection of speeches with a very interesting introduction. Well, let me come to what you made in your first speech. One of the main points that institutions that you left behind is the Monetary Policy Committee and idea of the Monetary Policy Committee and inflation targeting. Now, let me come to that part of your agenda and your speeches. Do you think that inflation targeting central banks, especially Reserve Bank, goes for overkill on inflation control? In the sense, regularly, you know, in 2014, you said 8% by January, and we delivered 6%. In 2015, you said we will reach 6%. By March, we were at 5%. You know, we were less than what you forecast or what you estimated. Likewise, this year, the Reserve Bank estimated that it would be 5, and we ended up at 3.7. So, is this a part of the plan?
I won't comment on the monetary policy after I left. I don't want to do that. Certainly when I was there, it wasn't that we were pushing harder than we thought was reasonable.
But forecasting higher, knowing fully well that the actual number will be lower, so that nobody asks you to cut.
No, that what we used to do is have a model-based forecast, but then have a judgment also that which we couldn't sort of tweak the model to do of how this is going, and I used that judgment. It wasn't that I thought what the model says is where it's going to be. I used that judgment to get a sense of how things would go. There were surprises along the way. It wasn't that we were. It was a perfect forecast. Nobody expected oil prices to fall as they did. I think the government did a good job in restraining food prices, and both those helped quite a bit in.
But that would be in the model, no? You would have put in crude prices in the model.
But nobody knew that crude prices would fall so much, right? They were 100 plus in 2014, and they came down quite a bit. So I think that there will always be surprises. I think if you check not RBI versus actuality, but RBI versus analyst forecasts, you will find there is a greater match there.
No, there isn't so much.
I don't think the analysts were so far. In fact, if analysts were in some sense being less optimistic about inflation falling,
in the medium term, yes, but several times. Well, I mean, I'm just trying to say whether the model itself is deliberately geared.
No,
the model has not been throwing up the numbers that actually turned out.
I think we would be silly to have a model that was deliberately biased.
Okay.
Just to give us more room.
No, or
and I don't think
does the model have to be tweaked because the numbers are coming in lower?
I think that updation of the model is always reasonable. Now, the question is, are the numbers coming in lower because there's a whole lot of new sort of information about the process, or because there are one-off surprises that are keeping inflation relatively low, right? So we don't expect a demonetization again.
Yeah.
And demonetization had some effect on prices.
Okay. Well, then let me introduce another diabolical element. Inflation targeting central banks, like appreciating rupee, like a strong currency, because if the currency depreciated, your inflation target could be affected. So do you all get biased in favor of a strong rupee?
See, when you say inflation targeting, you're sort of saying that it's very different from what was done before. Now, in general, if you remember, again, going back to my guru, Dr. Y.V. Reddy, he had a 5% inflation in mind. So unless you say that 5% was, as you just said, just for make-believe, didn't mean anything by it, he was inflation targeting. The target he had was 5%. Now, sometimes I see statements made as if this is a whole new genre of things. In general, you use all the instruments you have to try and achieve the target. In general also, as we said repeatedly, we are not trying to target the exchange rate. or using the exchange rate as a means to disinflation is very dangerous.
Okay.
Because if you peg the exchange rate stronger than it should be, and then reality hits and it has to collapse, you create a crisis for yourself.
No, but at the moment, do you think the rupee is overvalued?
No comment.
No, I mean,
I didn't comment on the rupee when I was in
no, I'll tell you,
and I
when the
won't
GDP
comment
numbers
again.
came, Rakesh Mohan was on the channel saying that the strong rupee is to take part of the blame.
Look, I
Import
won't
substitution
comment.
is happening.
I won't comment. I think I've seen some studies done by analysts which suggest that there are alternative interpretations of that. Let me put it this way, that every time there is a downfall in exports, we blame the rupee. Now, there are other things we can do to
No,
expand
I'm talking
exports.
about import substitution.
Okay. We look at an expansion in imports and we say we are substituting away from domestic production. Again, I think that it's a possibility, but at least I haven't seen strong evidence that in fact is a situation.
Okay. Well, let me come to the NPA situation, which is very serious. Do you think the RBI has done a magnificent job of taking companies to the NCLT? Do you think the RBI has done a good job?
Look, I haven't been following that process. I think the sort of doing the bankruptcy code was a very important step by this government. It needs to be credited for that. And operationalizing it so that now we are in the position to run cases through it, I think is very important. What remains to be done is to see that these are taken to their logical conclusion and we don't have a plethora of appeals and this and that which hold up the process. Because that was the problem always, whether it was debt recovery tribunals or operation of the SRFAC, appeals held it up and essentially disrupted the whole process.
Last week, the Supreme Court came with a earth-shattering order, emphatic order that it is backing the bankruptcy code.
Right. I think those kinds of statements are very helpful, and I think if we have a time-bound bankruptcy process with a clear allocation of rights in bankruptcy and a clear allocation of priority, it'll do wonders for our debt markets and wonders for the cleanup process. Our problem when we were trying to devise these various acronyms, SDR, S4, this, that, was we didn't have a bankruptcy code. So what was the threat at the end of it? If you didn't succeed in renegotiating out of bankruptcy, there was no bankruptcy to go into. These were more effective if there was a threat of bankruptcy. So all we could do is sort of provide these various mechanisms. What the bankruptcy law has done is created a shadow. If you don't succeed in renegotiating, this is what will happen. It has brought everybody to the table. Hopefully, the mix of out of court renegotiation and in bankruptcy dealing will fix the problem.
My question is slightly different. You had to say that you have to recognize this as NPA. The next RBI has actually named the names who have to be taken to the bankruptcy court. Was that the right way to go?
I mean, ultimately, it should be a commercial decision by the bankers. And the problem, of course, in this difficult situation is if the bankers aren't doing it, somebody has to do it. And I think that's where this ordinance has been brought in. Ultimately, these decisions are commercial decisions, and it should go back to the bankers.
Okay, so you see it as a temporary.
I hope it is temporary.
What do the global markets look like now to you? Do they look frothy at all? Is there a bubble in any part?
I think that there are places of concern.